this was a real opportunity, I thought, to create a film that could connect, as I say, connect with almost anybody, and hopefully dispel some of those uh, kind of misplaced perceptions that I think Bitcoin has. And so the vision really was, well, let's make this film about these this great story in El Salvador and these incredible characters, and let's show what they're doing and how the effects that they're having on people and their village and the community and ultimately the country. But if we're going to try and connect with a kind of mainstream audience, then we also need to have some element of educational aspect to it. So, some element to explain a little bit about what Bitcoin is, why it's relevant, what problem it's solving.
All right, everybody. We are back. It has been a minute. I think it's been 2 or 3 weeks since I've posted a podcast. We are here today with Graham Rittener, the producer of Dare to Dream, a story about El Salvador. I'm sorry, a story from El Salvador. I just want to make sure I say that correctly. And this is a documentary on elzonte, which is also colloquially referred to as Bitcoin Beach, the first Bitcoin circular economy we saw here on planet Earth. That's my brief introduction. Graham, if you could please tell the audience a little bit about yourself, I will hand the mic over to you.
Okay, well, thanks, Frank. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it. And yeah, it was great to meet you. I'm sure we can talk more about that and El Salvador and everything. But yeah, so uh, I'm originally from the UK and born in London. Spent my early years in different parts of the world. I think they got me a little taste of the spirit of adventure, I guess, and done a lot of traveling and living in different countries ever since then. And I'm just going to give you the very kind of top level kind of intro, and if we can dig into anything that you might find interesting. But yeah, I became a Bitcoiner very early on, and I've been passionate about the world of Bitcoin ever since. And about 2 years ago, just 2.5 years ago, I went on an adventure to El Salvador to Bitcoin Beach, as you described it before, and met the guys there. And to cut a very long story short, because I'm sure we'll get into more of that, I ended up becoming a producer of my first ever documentary. So yeah, not a producer by background, but I got inspired by this amazing story and these amazing characters, and I felt that this was something that had to be brought to life in a film. And so I decided to fund and produce my first ever feature documentary. And yeah, it came out a couple of months ago, and that's why we're here to talk.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, and so Graham and I met in elzonte. I believe we were both there for the Adopting Bitcoin conference last week, and we got to know each other. A mutual friend, Scott Wolf, introduced us. We were hanging out. We started talking. I learned that Graham had produced his film. I actually just watched the film yesterday. I had heard about it. As I told Graham, I had it saved in my Twitter bookmarks. So I finally got around to watching it yesterday. And what I actually want to jump in and start with is that it's absolutely beautiful, the way that it's shot, the scoring to it, the way it's produced. And I was just curious how much of a lift it was. It really seems like there was a lot put into the actual production value of the film. And as we talked about a little bit in person, there was a heavy focus on the narrative. So let me separate that into two questions. did the narrative sort of reveal itself, or did you have something in mind when you went to go make the film? Or, and then you sort of pieced it together to sort of tell the story you wanted to tell? And then also, what was it like producing all of this? And I think, as you mentioned, hiring some musicians, and there was some other traveling involved as well, going to, I think it was Louisiana, to Texas, to interview other people outside of El Salvador. So it's a big question there. Feel free to kind of start wherever you'd like.
Okay, yeah. So on the narrative side, it was interesting because we didn't have a very clear narrative. We had some ideas, right, and certainly the background to the Bitcoin Beach story, the characters involved. That was something that we knew that we wanted to focus on. So we knew that we had Mike Peterson and Roman and Jorge, three central characters to this story, and so we knew that there was a really interesting backstory before Bitcoin had even arrived on the scene, especially before Bitcoin, the Bitcoin donor, who became a pivotal character in this whole thing, and sometimes I think gets a little underappreciated when we're all celebrating what's happening in El Salvador and all of that at the conference, and sometimes that donor, because I guess he is anonymous, it gets a little bit forgotten. But
Could I
what?
just for
Yeah.
the audience members who might not know, that's actually a great point. So let me just mention that a little bit, if you don't mind. So we have this guy, Mike Peterson, who's an expat who's working in the community, doing sort of community development sort of work, or just working with the people in the community. We have a few other main characters, Jorge Valenzuela. We have, and then it's Chimbera, it's Roman, um, and out of nowhere, someone I think had donated, it was a Bitcoin to someone. I forget who it was in the community, but then there was a bigger anonymous donation made in Bitcoin through Mike Peterson to elzonte, and the person essentially wanted people to start using Bitcoin in the community. We still don't know who that donor is. So just to give a little bit of context there about the actual story there, that's what Graham was referring to. So please continue, Graham. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, no, not at all. It's a really important point, and I love it. I think it was it's a great part of the story, and it sort of fits. It's very fitting, right, with Bitcoin's background, with Satoshi, who no one knows who Satoshi is, and so there's this sort of mysterious kind of mythical
Yep.
character of the anonymous donor who really orchestrated or got behind this entire vision of a circular economy.
Yep.
And it was, really because of that the whole Bitcoin Beach thing was enabled, and that's how it all came about. So going back to the question, we had some ideas of the narrative. We knew we wanted this, as I say, before the Bitcoin donor turned up, that the characters involved were doing amazing things in the community, in elzonte, especially for the children. There was this whole narrative about the problem with people emigrating right out of El Salvador, people fleeing the country to go to the US because of it was such a violent, poverty-stricken, hopeless country in many respects. And so the fact that these two characters, Chimbera and Jorge, wanted to actually, they decided that they would not do that, and they wanted to stay and try and fight to change their country. And they knew that one of the biggest problems they had was the fact that everybody was leaving, and so they didn't have any professional people with actual skills and that could help change things. They would be fleeing the country. So they made that conscious decision: no, we're going to stay, and we're going to try and do something about our local community. We'll start with our community, but they had a bigger dream of wanting to change their country. So that was all part of something we wanted to capture in the narrative. But of course, when we went down there and we were on the ground and we started doing interviews, we met other characters and other things came out, as you would expect.
Yep.
And then yeah, a whole other part of the narrative started coming out, and we met some really fascinating characters with great stories, and yeah, so that there's a little bit of both, I guess, is the point. We had some idea of what we wanted to capture, but another, and that was one of the beautiful things about making that film, was just how everything seemed to fall into place.
Mm.
We just the people involved. John Vallis, who's another podcaster who became a kind of a key figure within the story, who just happened to be in Elzonte when I went there in the first place, and so he was already talking to Chimbera and Roman, just doing podcasts with those guys, and then I turned up and we got talking about doing a documentary, and they were like, "Well, we want John to be in it," and
Mm.
so and I was like, "Great!" I love John as well. He's one of my favorite podcasters. So everything just fell into place, and so some of the characters as well and the narrative just, and then of course Joe Delahunty, the director, did an incredible job of weaving it together to bring out these storylines, and
Mm.
we had a very clear vision at the beginning that we wanted to tell the human stories around Bitcoin. We wanted to show how Bitcoin was changing people's lives,
Yep.
and so that was very much part of the objective. And it's always great to hear good feedback, because that's what we were obviously setting out to do. So, that was the first question, and then the second question I've already forgotten now.
So that's okay. No, that's great. So yes, so the
Oh,
narrative sort of unfolded. We have this Dare to Dream narrative, and to give a little background, having just watched it, Jorge Valenzuela and Chimbera Roman, they're charismatic, they're very compassionate, they're very empathic, and they're teaching basic skills, whether it's, I mean, we won't call surfing a basic skill, but they're teaching everything from surfing to working with like language classes, computer classes, all of this stuff, trying to basically create some sort of human capital in the community. And this is before something like Bitcoin existed. So they're more just sort of community leaders trying to kind of make, like, as you said, have it so that people don't want to leave, to give them some, I don't know, to create something within the community, something hopeful. But also there's this very sort of emotional element, telling the kids, we have in the film, Roman giving a talk to the kids on the beach saying, have a big dream, go after that big dream. Don't worry if people tell you it's ridiculous. So I think that you captured that very well, because the idea that this sort of quiet beachfront town in El Salvador becomes now something that all of the people in the Bitcoin community have their eyes on. More than that, the world has their eyes on. Major mainstream media, traditional financial media, watching this story unfold. It's a pretty wild thing to see. So I think you really did capture this narrative well, and they sort of had these grand ambitions, and maybe what's happened is even grander than they even could have imagined, and we're only in the early stages of it, which is wild. My next question was, beyond going to El Zonte, you also went to interview Robert Breedlove in Texas, a major Bitcoin podcaster, the host of the What Is Money show. And then you were in Louisiana, kind of learning a little bit more about Bitcoin mining, how that works. So what made you start including these broader elements outside of El Zonte, sort of more almost educational elements to the film?
Yeah, so we had we decided from the beginning what kind of film we wanted to make, and I had a very clear vision of what this documentary would be. For me, it was a very important opportunity to be able to, as I talked about before, these human stories I felt really were able to, we could connect with anybody on a human level. And we're always, one of the great subjects within Bitcoin is about orange pilling, right? How do we orange pill different people? How do we drive more adoption? And some people I know are sort of a bit like, well, people will adopt it as they adopt it. We don't need to try and orange pill people. It'll happen when it happens.
Yeah.
But I don't really subscribe to that point of view. I
Mm.
believe that Bitcoin does have the power to really make a huge difference in this world, and the world is in a pretty sorry state in most, in many ways. And we, as we know why, a lot of us know why when we're in Bitcoin, we think about the fiat, standard and what that's done to the world and how it's corroded and corrupted so many different parts of the world. So we want to drive adoption, or at least many of us do. And so for me, this was a real opportunity, I thought, to create a film that could connect, as I say, connect with almost anybody, and hopefully dispel some of those kind of misplaced perceptions that I think Bitcoin has. And so the vision really was, well, let's make this film about this great story in El Salvador and these incredible characters, and let's show what they're doing and how the effects that they're having on people and their village and their community and ultimately the country. But if we're going to try and connect with a kind of mainstream audience, then we also need to have some element of educational aspect to it, some element to explain a little bit about what Bitcoin is, why it's relevant, what problem it's solving. What we didn't want to do, on the other hand, was go very deep into the, what is Bitcoin, how does it work, what's the technical backgrounds, and because we knew we'd drive people away if we did that. So it was a very clear idea. It was to try and pique people's interest. Okay, wow, what is, it's amazing what the Bitcoin's doing here in this village with these people. And okay, oh right, so it's solving this problem, but I need to dig deeper into that. And I think, from my perspective, I don't know if you agree, but orange pilling really ultimately comes down to the individual. You can tell somebody till you're blue in the face, how good it is and how great it is and what problem it's solving and all the rest of it. But that person really needs to go and find out for themselves. They need to go on that journey, right? And so that was the thinking. Really, was let's just do enough that it piques their interest. They can see that it maybe really is solving a problem here. They don't get enough in the film to fully get it and go, oh right, that's it, I've got it now. But hopefully afterwards they think, you know what, I'm going to look a bit more into this Bitcoin thing. It's actually quite interesting. So that was the thinking, and that's why we had Rob really talking through the more the kind of background, the monetary background side of it. And why Bitcoin was fixing a specific problem. We also did filming in Louisiana, as you mentioned, which was around the stranded gas mining facility. And likewise, there was another one of those misplaced perceptions that we wanted to try and address front on, that this idea that Bitcoin mining is destroying the environment. And so we'd already done we'd been up to the geothermal plants in El Salvador. Did a great piece up there when they just started mining Bitcoin for the very first time. It was literally just, I think, in the couple of weeks before we filmed that, they just got their first sort of mining facility up and running. So that was great. And then we thought, well, let's build on that. And, because this is not just, it's not just El Salvador using geothermal or using energy that's not, that's renewable, I guess, energy. And so we managed to organize this trip to Giga Energy, who have this quite a big mining facility now running on stranded gas. And so that was, we went there to do that as well. And then we also, there were a couple of other bits we filmed in the US as well. One really important part was the mother of the boy who was working as a lifeguard in Elzonte. And his mother had fled El Salvador 15 years ago and left him behind, but only for his sake. She went to look for work, which was very much a theme of the whole film, and so we were able to go and interview her in the US and have both sides of the story, which was
Yeah.
kind of magical.
Yep.
So I guess that is a long-winded way of
No, it's
of answering why we did the US part.
yeah, it's perfect, and you offer some real great tidbits of what you covered in this film, I think, without giving too much away. So obviously I encourage people to watch it, but the communication, especially watching cutting back and forth between this boy you're talking about, training as a lifeguard, trying to make his life better in elzonte. He lost his mom, moved to the States, or emigrated to the States when he was 4, if I remember correctly, and then the
Yeah.
mother is there saying, I wish maybe I had gotten more educated, but I'm just here cleaning and this and that, and the kid's talking about making his mother proud. I mean, obviously, I'm tearing up watching this. It's incredibly powerful, and that human story is actually the focus of this podcast. So it's called New Renaissance Capital, and the tagline is Bitcoin and Human Flourishing. So the idea here is
Perfect.
yeah, it's to focus on. We know Bitcoin is great. I go to BitDevs meetings and meetups about the technical side of it, and just leave with a migraine because I don't really grasp that as much. That's not how my brain works. But I very much see the ways that it has the power to change behavior, to bring hope to situations that otherwise were pretty dire. And I'm completely fascinated by this concept of the Bitcoin circular economy. I'm friends with some of the guys in Bitcoin Nikasi, and watching someone like Valentin at Motive Peru speak at Adopting Bitcoin, I was crying. I mean, I can't, especially I think the people that have been in these communities before Bitcoin existed, the people that have sort of like the Mike Petersons who said, like, I want to be here, I want to help, and then just saw Bitcoin come along and started using it as a tool, which I think is the best way to approach how to use Bitcoin. And it's a beautiful thing to see that, because I think if it's going to have a certain effect, especially if you're going to be a foreigner introducing magic internet money to people, it's like you really have to have the trust of that community. I say that facetiously, obviously. So my question there too is, I often reference Bitcoin as a catalyst for change when I talk about it, especially on this podcast. Could you give a little bit of an overview of some of the changes that you picked up on in the community, again, without maybe giving away too much of what you cover in the film? Just what sort of changes did you notice in people? Maybe, I don't know if you would see as much during the course of creating the film, but what did people share with you? What sorts of experiences did you hear that sort of made people maybe feel a little bit more hopeful, or maybe have a bit more faith in themselves as a result of now Bitcoin being somewhat of a financial platform that they can use in their life?
Yeah, so I think the one of the main, well, there's a few key points I think that came out.
Mm.
Obviously, one of them is the fact that no one there had access to bank accounts, right?
Yep.
And so very much in line with this, the word that's now been used, the unbanked, right? Which is describes so much of the world. And so, these people had, because they have no bank accounts, they have no access to a digital economy.
Yep.
Everything from, maybe they wouldn't have enough money to do this anyway, but from booking a flight to booking a cinema ticket to whatever, all these things that we take for granted, they just don't, they're not able to do, right? And it's because of the lack of access to banking and to so they're very much a cash only society. And so here was an opportunity within their own circular economy to at least have a digital form of payment, and to be able to actually store money in a different way. So again, back then it's less relevant now, because the country's become much safer in the last few
Yep.
years. But when we were making the film, it was still a pretty dangerous place. And up until the moment we made that film, we were filming, it was a huge issue for people, was thinking about how do they store their cash, and going anywhere with cash on them. They always knew there was a danger that
Wow.
that money would be taken off them, right, from the gangs. And so that was a big thing. And I think when Bitcoin came along, the circular economy came along, and they actually knew that they could have a way of storing money that the gangs wouldn't be able to, probably wouldn't know about it, and wouldn't be able to get access to it. Was one thing. So
Yep.
um, so that was it. And then I think the really important piece of this was the saving, the mentality of saving.
Yep.
Something that just was not part of their mentality at all. They lived very much, hand to mouth, and whatever cash they had was pretty much paying for the next meal, or their their uh, their rent, or the electricity bill. And so really they didn't think about saving money. It just wasn't really factored into their long-term thinking at all.
Yep.
And so with Bitcoin, that changed, and that really became clear, that they started seeing it as a savings technology.
Mm.
And even though, you know, the cynics in this world we're trying to say, well, it's ridiculous. Why these people don't have enough money to be saving in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
They only make a few dollars a day. It doesn't make any sense. That wasn't the case at all. They were actually starting to think, okay, well, if I put a little bit into that, then maybe that'll. And the other, really big point about this as well is another thing that gets brought up a lot is volatility, right? And
Yep.
again, the cynics say, oh, well, they're just going to get absolutely slaughtered when Bitcoin, has drops 80%. But I found that quite frustrating, because they're not stupid,
Right. Right.
and they're not going to just throw all their money into something new, and so they think about things like that. They
Yep.
understand that there's risk. They understand there's volatility, and they manage that accordingly. So they put money in. They put as much as they think that they can afford, and I've really noticed that in the last couple of years, where we've had the bear market, that they haven't been put off.
Right.
By this. They haven't they
Right.
haven't all lost their money and gone.
Yep.
And so it really was an unfounded concern. And so yeah, they clearly are starting to think more long term and
Yep.
saving. And we heard some very specific stories of people who have been able to do things like start building a house. We had one story with when John's getting his haircut from
Yep. Yep.
from the hairdresser who
I love
accepts
that.
Bitcoin. Yeah,
Yeah.
and she talks about how they've that her and her husband are now building a house because of the
Yep.
money they saved in Bitcoin, something that they weren't able to do before.
Yep.
So yeah, I think those are some really clear changes, transformations that we saw as a direct result of this circular economy. And the real beauty of this, I think, is that it's still so early. So
Yep.
that this is just the first stories that are coming out. But
Yep.
if this continues the way we believe it will, and we have another run where the Bitcoin purchasing power, let's say, increases dramatically as the fiat as fiat money goes into Bitcoin,
Right.
then these characters in elzonte and beyond are going to benefit immensely, and we're going to
Yep.
start hearing even better stories and even more of them, as they so yeah. And this is obviously just one microcosm of what's happening all around the world. So
Yep.
imagine just how this is going to affect people over the next few years as they have such increased purchasing power
Yep.
and savings. as a result of Bitcoin.
Yeah, I love that part. I love that about Bitcoin in general. I've spent some time in other countries, in Latin America and in Africa. I lived in Ghana for a bit and in Venezuela. And in Ghana, I was in a very rural region. In Venezuela, I was in a barrio, or inner city, kind of lower socioeconomic status neighborhood. And one of the thoughts I always had was just I was always amazed. I would say, particularly in Ghana, at how good people were with their hands, how entrepreneurial they were, how sharp they were, just generally speaking, because they didn't have a lot of resources. They have community, they know how to work with each other, and they know how to do things to survive, to have a business, to use their hands to build something, whatever it is. And my thoughts while I was there, and once I started learning about the circular economies, was just like, oh, if they just had good money, or access to something where they could save. Like, we don't, like, I've worked for the United Nations, all these, for nonprofits. I was a teacher in the public school system for years. I don't really think it's fair to look at these situations in a paternalistic way, the way you just described, saying like, oh, but what do you, these people don't even have money to save. Don't make that decision for them. Let them make that decision for themselves. Give them enough credit to say like, okay, yeah, we get it, this thing is volatile. And I'm so glad that you included the story of this woman who was cutting John Vallis's hair, the podcaster you mentioned earlier. In the film, she's cutting his hair, and John says to her, how long have you been accepting Bitcoin? And I think she had been accepting it from 2019. And then she said, she was in the process of building a house, and she said she basically sold at the top, or higher up. We took some of that money out and we used it to pay for the house. I was like, yes, like, because that's, I think, a perfect example of using it as a tool, not treating it like a religion, like I just hold my Bitcoin forever. It's like, no, like, you want to go pay some school tuition, go pay for a house, go pay down some debt, use the money, use some of the profits to do something for yourself. And I think that you really, really captured that, especially in that story. I was so happy that one of those stories was in there. Because a lot of the critique of El Salvador is like, well, he made it legal tender when it cost 40 something thousand dollars per Bitcoin. And then from there, maybe it went up a little bit more, but it's tanked ever since. It's like, yeah, but people were using it before that. And there's more to the story than that. And nobody wants to, especially in the mainstream media, nobody acknowledges the ebbs and flows of the 4-year cycles around the Bitcoin halving and all this stuff. But I thought you did a great job of capturing that. And I do think people are sharp, and I think they, okay, yeah, let me take a little bit out. I did pretty well here, and I think I trust people with that. I know in the Bitcoin community, it can sometimes be a little bit of a thing. You're just supposed to hold it forever and never sell it or whatever. Like, that's not my approach to it. I got into it because I had student loan debt I was trying to get out of. So when the price is a bit higher, I sell some and I pay down my debt. I mean, it's a tool for that.
Yeah.
It's just, that's what it is. It's a tool. And I think
It's a tool, exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
So
It's a way. I think John Dennehy is his name, who from My First Bitcoin.
yep.
Me pretty bad, but talked about that at the Adopting Bitcoin conference, and
Yep.
it's bang on. It's exactly right. It's not the be all and end all itself. Bitcoin
Right.
is a tool. It's a way for, well, a whole bunch of different things. Whether it's empowerment, to be able to do more things, whether it's to have increased purchasing power so that you can build a house or send children to school or
That's right.
whatever. And so yeah, and I'm with you. Although I do absolutely save a lot in Bitcoin. I also
Yep.
love going. One of the things I love going to El Salvador is be able to spend some
Spend
sats.
it. Yeah.
How those transactions are just great.
Yep.
So yeah, no, it's very much that. It's a tool for all these other human things that we've been talking about, right?
Yeah, it's perfectly put. I want to actually rewind a little bit too to what you said about safety. So someone said to me while I was down there, they mentioned like, oh yeah, there were a lot of gangs in Elzonte, and I think it's easier now. So people go down there for something like adopting Bitcoin. They go down there now, after Bukele's crackdown on the gangs and everything, and it just seems like a paradise. And my first thought is like, oh, it must have sort of always been this way. But then, obviously it hasn't always been that way. So I wanted to actually ask you, what was it like from a safety perspective when you were making this documentary to what you saw this time around, 1 week ago?
Yeah, so yeah, there's actually been quite a bit of change. I mean, when we went, there had already been the beginnings of some increased safety, right? They
Okay.
had already done some made some efforts to improve things, but it was still a long way short of where it is now.
Yep.
And so one of the things that we were were told when we were down there, we had to be mindful of where things that we were saying in public. You know, we conversations that we might have when we were
Mm.
outside of the hotel or outside of someone's house. If we were in a restaurant, a bar, even in an elzonte, we just had to be somewhat careful of what we would say. If we were don't really, we shouldn't be talking about gangs basically in any kind of
Mm.
public space. Um, and yeah, so it was definitely something, and the stories that we heard from people who had been affected by the gangs was still very raw, you know, and the the amount of stories we heard from local people, you know, who had lost their brother or their best friend
Mm.
or their son or their, you know, it tended to be boys, I have to say, more than girls. They're the ones obviously that get sucked into the gangs. They get
Mm.
either killed or mugged, or you know. But a lot of tragic stories of and as I say, felt still felt very raw when we were there. People telling us those stories, and yeah, we had to be. We had in fact we had our own incident because we were we had our own crew on the ground in El Salvador for about a month, but we were also working with a couple of local Salvadorian guys to help us, some extra camera work and equipment, and
Okay.
also transport. So we had a couple of guys that were very much part of our group, part of our crew when we were down there filming. Really lovely, lovely guys. But they lived around San Salvador, and
Okay.
they and we were down in El Zonte. So you know, as you know, but in case your listeners don't, you know, that's depending on traffic, anywhere from sort of 40 minutes to sort of an hour of of traveling. And so they would come down every day. They would go back to their homes in San Salvador and come down every morning
Okay.
to film with us. And one day we had to get up really early. We was going to go and film this sort of morning run, and it was the lifeguard training where they
Yep.
do they do a really early morning run at 6 o'clock in the morning, and they kind of run through sort of somewhat sort of jungly type area, and they do these exercises, and then they all end up in the sea and swim around these rocks and these really strong currents, and it's all part of the, you know, it's a great, you know, it was a great activity to be able to capture. But it started at like 6 o'clock in the morning, and we knew we had to be there, you know, probably 5:30, something like that. So we were getting up at like 4:30 to get there, and the guys from San Salvador were meant to be meeting us at the, you know, the specific spot where we arranged to meet, and it was all arranged. There was quite a lot of planning had gone in to make sure that we were going to film this specific day. It was just because of the schedule that we had. It really had to happen on this one specific day, and one of them was also going to be operating the drone. While Joe was the director who was doing the main camera work, but one of the other guys was a good drone operator, and so he was going to be operating the drone while Joe was on the main camera, and so he was a crucial part of this whole filming operation. And they didn't turn up, and we were like, where are they? And then they
Mm.
didn't turn up. We were trying to phone them, couldn't get through, and then we started getting worried. You know, we were like, this is very unlike them. If they were ever,
Yeah.
you know, late, they would let us know, and they, you know, they didn't turn up, and we had to get somebody else to help with the drone. And yeah, and then eventually we found out they got mugged at the traffic lights, They traveled on motorbike every day, and
Mm,
that specific, I think it was actually the night before when they were going back. They went back quite late, and they just got pulled off their motorbike. The motorbike was stolen. They had everything taken off them, and so yeah, we were like, wow, we hadn't. It was became very real. We hear
yeah.
stories, and then suddenly, it became very real. And so, yeah, so that it was very much a big thing back then when we were filming.
Hmm.
There was, in fact, there was something called the Bitcoin Week where they had adopting Bitcoin
Right.
and La BitConf in the
Yep.
same week, and I can't remember whether it was just before. I think it was just before, or maybe just after. It would almost seem like it was the timing was done deliberately. There was a huge bout of killing. Suddenly,
Mm,
the number of murders went up dramatically over a course of a couple of days. It was a huge thing because it was all across the news and it was like, oh wow, this is still pretty bad. This is a bad situation. So yeah, it was very much a big thing back then, and now it's really changed quite dramatically. You can feel it, you can sense it. It's the
yeah.
danger has gone. Really don't feel any sense of danger at all anymore, and it's been amazing what's happened. Now, I mean, you can talk about how that's happened and
Yep.
the criticism of how it was done. I have my own thoughts on
Yeah.
that. But yeah, ultimately, I feel like it was probably a necessary. It was not a necessary evil, but it was necessary to go through that process. And
Yep.
yes, there was probably some collateral damage, and I
Yep.
feel terrible for the innocent people that got caught up in that. But I don't feel that really in the end there was any other way of
Yep.
dealing with it. And so yeah, but back to the point, it's changed. It's changed a lot since we were filming.
Yeah. It almost I've despite having beyond living in Venezuela, I've also studied in Mexico and spent some time in Guatemala and Peru. It almost freaked me out how calm and nonviolent. I mean, how calm and hopeful the country was. I've never been to a Latin American country in that state, and I'm not even sure one has existed in that state in my lifetime. It's
Yeah,
the closest I'd ever sort of gotten to, especially the vibe in Bitcoin Beach. I used to work at a food cooperative in Venezuela, and it was a really beautiful, oddly enough, it was a perfectly Marxist food cooperative where everyone made the same amount of money, but it was a living wage and it was voluntary. So if you wanted to be a part of it, and I used to sit in these meetings, these community meetings where people would vote on the way every dollar was spent, and they owned farms and they sold produce and all this. And in that regard, a voluntary situation like that, it really helped a lot of people, and there was a drastic sense of hope. But that was a sort of very small thing happening in Venezuela. That was not what the vibe was. I remember the first week I was there, very quickly learning the Spanish, the word secuestrar, which means to kidnap someone, seeing it on the newspapers every day, and just being like, oh, that's a word that gets thrown around normally here. So coming from that, I think that was the last Latin American country I had spent time in before coming to El Salvador. I also have family that did amazing work in Latin America in the 70s and 80s, and they have issues with the way things have happened with Bukele. But I guess my argument still remains. I have 6 nieces and nephews. I have 3 sisters, my mother. I wouldn't want them living in gang territory. I think the bottom line with all this is that I am happier that it's safer. And I know that it sucks the way it happened. And I know that it was sort of a big sweeping thing. But at the end of the day, I'd prefer things be safer for people. And I have some even understanding of, I don't know if it was MS-13 down there, but even growing up on Long Island outside of New York, MS-13 members are prevalent in New York, and we would get stories on the news here, in New York, of teenage girls being chopped to pieces as part of the initiation rites, and it's a brutal, brutal gang culture. And so I think people, when we talk about it here in a sort of academic fashion, but human rights, but this, it's like people, when you're living in that, the words human rights and everything else, they don't mean anything. Like it's unsafe to go outside. At best, you're just getting robbed, on a daily basis. You're handing over some amount of your money. And I saw Stacy and Max speak in New York. Stacy and Max are advisors to Bukele, but they spoke in New York, and I think the amount of money that was being stolen every year equated to about 30% of the country's GDP. That's how much money gangs were taking from people. So we're talking about a
Wow.
really substantial amount of money being taken from people who are earning, generally speaking, very, very little money. The minimum wage
Yeah.
in El Salvador it's like 312 US dollars or something like that.
Yeah.
So the safety thing, it sort of blew my mind. I had a few conversations with people, and I've heard it referred to this way. There's going to be maybe a back and forth. Who knows what things will look like after Bukele. I hope that enough stuff gets codified into law where things remain sort of safe and a place that attracts people from other countries, and that's maybe part of the reason to keep things safe. Not that it shouldn't be enough to just keep Salvadorians safe, but we'll see what the incentives all sort of amount to in the end. But I
Yeah.
appreciate you sharing that. And one of the things I was also going to ask is, what did we not see? Based, when you make a documentary, there's always going to be an editing process. There's probably some stuff, some interviews that you loved, or some segments of interviews that you really loved, things you wanted to share, but maybe it didn't work exactly with the narrative, or you just didn't have the time for it. So is there anything that you wanted to share based on the experience making this and the conversations you had that we didn't see in the documentary?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. It's true. That was one of the biggest challenges, right? It was because we were on the ground, as I say, for about a month
Hmm.
in El Salvador, just staying outside of elzonte. We were filming every single day,
Okay.
from morning to night, pretty much.
Wow.
And so we had so much footage, right? And then we also had another couple of weeks in the US, and then we actually went back one more time to the US. So we had a lot of footage, so many hours, and some really great stuff, that never made it. And so yeah, it's a good question. I think there's a few things that stick out. We had there was a whole initiative in elzonte with uh, affordable housing being
Hmm.
built for the locals. I don't know if
Hmm.
you came across that
Is,
story at all, or that.
is that Coinbase being? I saw something at adopting Bitcoin of Coinbase being behind affordable housing being built, and people could pay in Bitcoin. They could pay the rent in Bitcoin. It's a nonprofit that's working on it. Coinbase is supporting it. Is this the same project, or am I making
Yeah,
this
it's
up?
it's connected. It's
Okay.
connected. Yeah, I think they made a donation to a big donation to a nonprofit
Okay.
that is working. I can't remember exactly how, but there's an organization. I think they're called News Story, something like that. News
Okay.
Story, and they are, yeah, helping the locals themselves move out of these little huts made of corrugated iron and wood shacks into
Yep.
proper houses. And so we had one guy who was working for Bitcoin Beach who was going through that process himself, a guy called Salim,
Okay.
and a lovely guy. And he was actually from Guatemala, but he'd been down there for a while.
Hmm.
And we did a whole section on him. And so he and his family, so he had a wife and a couple of young kids. They were basically building their own house,
Hmm.
but they've been, through this initiative, they've got the land, the place to do it, and they were obviously being helped financially with the materials, and I think maybe they were getting some help on very specialist areas of the construction, but
Okay.
they were very much involved in building their own house. And interviewed them, filmed them. They were like a lovely family,
Mm.
and it was just a great. It was yeah. Just to be clear, this whole initiative was using Bitcoin. Bitcoin was a part of this. So not only was he part of Bitcoin Beach, but Bitcoin was a part of this initiative to help with affordable housing for the locals. And so yeah, it was just it was a great story. It was a great section, and really lovely family, lovely characters. We saw they took us into their old home, where the home that they were living in at the
Mm.
time, and then also showed us where they were building their new one, just to show make the comparison. And yeah, so it was a shame that never made it. It just, as I say, we had to be pretty brutal in the end in terms of. But that was one really that was one story, and then there was what was I going to say? There was another. Well, there's a couple of other things. There was one. There was all about bringing this guy who was part of bringing the internet to the most remote parts of El Salvador, because that was another
Mm.
thing. Another question mark around the whole Bitcoin thing was, well, what about these areas that are not on connected to the internet as it stands?
Yeah.
And so there was one guy who was an American guy, actually, who was that was his thing. He was bringing internet to the most rural, isolated areas to
Yeah.
get them connected,
Mm.
and part of that was also obviously then that they would be able to transact in Bitcoin. So that was another cool story, which we filmed him, we interviewed him,
Mm.
but that didn't make it. Um, so yeah, there was quite a lot of stuff that didn't make it, but there was a couple of examples, I guess.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And as you're telling the story, and I, and as you're telling stories about it, I see you smiling, and I'm curious as to how it feels to have this out here now, have this out, for people to see after the amount of work that it took, for a few months. The documentary's been out. What have the reactions been like? How does it feel to have it out there? And then, yeah, let's start with those two questions. Then I have a follow up.
Yeah, so it feels good.
Yeah, I can
It
imagine.
was a long journey. So
Yeah.
when I started the journey, when I first made that commitment to get behind this and to fund it, and I had a vision, right? I had an idea of what this could be and so on. But because I'd never made a film before, I had no real idea of what was coming, what
Yep.
the amount of effort required. In my mind at the time, I kind of thought I was going to be more of a sort of back, I guess someone who was putting their money where their mouth is, and helping to fund this. But I
Yep.
hadn't really realized how much of a hands-on role that I would end up doing in
Yep.
actually producing it. And so it was actually a lot of work, but it was fun work. I'm not, not like trying to make out that it was that it was too arduous or anything like that.
Sure.
It was
Sure.
a great project, but it was a long journey, and so it was a 2-year journey basically, right?
Mm.
I mean, just to break it down, it was about 3 months of planning and preparing before we
Wow.
went and filmed. Then there was 6 to 8 weeks of actual filming in both El Salvador and the US, and then there was about 8-9 months of editing,
Okay.
and so that was a long process. We started off with a film that was, I think, over 2 hours long at the
Okay.
beginning, the very first edit, and we knew that was too long, so we just kept having to try and cut and edit and edit. It's still quite a long one, 96 minutes, I think.
Yep.
But
Yep.
so yeah, so when finally, and then I just once we had got the sort of final thing, then we went through the distribution process, which might be worth kind of talking about as well, because it's
Sure.
actually
Yeah.
quite
Please.
relevant to the whole vision of what we wanted to do.
Yep.
So because we wanted to try and get this in front of as many sort of mainstream normies as possible, we had to make a decision on how is this film going to go out. Was it going to be something we would just stick on YouTube and go down that route, and which has its benefits. It makes it very easy. It's accessible to everyone who's on the internet.
Yep.
Globally. There's one link, you can send everyone there.
Yep.
And definitely there are some aspects of that which I kind of wish we had, because it's a bit more complicated the way we've done it. But I felt that probably what would happen was that would get largely circulated within the Bitcoin
Yeah.
community, for want
Yeah.
of a better word, and it would mainly probably be watched by Bitcoiners rather than getting it in front of a bigger, wide, broader mainstream type audience.
Yep.
And so once we had the final edit, and we'd done a couple of screenings, and the feedback was really, really good. We felt we had something really strong, and it was a kind of beautiful film that connected and on a human level, and the feedback was really good. And so we thought, okay, well, maybe it's worth trying to get this out. Obviously, in independent film making land, the holy grail is to get it on Netflix, right? That's because you just know that's where you get the eyeballs. That's the most, even if it's not. Because the other thing, just to add something here, which is, if you're not looking at it from a financial perspective, which we weren't, I was not in this for any kind of commercial profit making venture. In fact, if there are any profits, I did a deal that 90% of those get donated to Bitcoin Beach and
Nice.
their community projects and so on. So there was no profit incentive. So the real motive was to get it seen by as many different people as possible from all over the world. And as I say, the holy grail really is to get it on Netflix. But beyond that, there's obviously many other different kind of platforms and networks and ways that you can get it out in. And so that requires either getting picked up by a Netflix or something similar, or going through a distributor who put it out on many different platforms. And so that was the route that we ended up going down. That was I managed to find a sort of consultant stroke agent who was able to pitch it on my behalf. I contracted him to do that. That's his speciality. He works with independent films to get them distributed, to pitch them. And so so that's what happened, and we were fortunate to get a distribution deal. I think it's the biggest, most widely distributed Bitcoin film there is. So
is that right? Okay.
I believe so. I don't know of any other Bitcoin film that's out on so many different. I mean, just to give a sense of that, in the distributor got exclusive rights to the US, Canada, and the Caribbean. The US and Canada are still by far the biggest markets when it comes to video content. And so it's within those countries. Well, within the US specifically, it's out on every single cable TV network, the biggest satellite TV networks. It's on Amazon, Apple TV, YouTube Movies, Google Play, Xbox. It's really pretty prevalent everywhere. So I don't think there's another Bitcoin film that's been able to do that. So where was I? Basically, so that was we went down that distribution route. As I say, it makes it a little bit more complicated now, because depending on where you are in the world, it's in different places on different platforms. and so on. One thing, obviously, which was really important to me was that outside. So I don't have much flexibility. I don't have any flexibility in terms of being able to distribute it or sell it in the territories where they have the exclusive rights. But outside of those territories, then it was really important that the film could be accessed paying with Sats, Bitcoin. So precisely for the unbanked,
Sure.
so people that don't have bank accounts, and so through our website we also we sell it with Bitcoin.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so I think the original question was about how good it feels. So yeah, it's been a big journey, long journey. The last part of that journey was that was where I was going, was the distribution.
Sure.
So that in itself took another. I mean, we managed to get a deal within 2 or 3 months of starting that process, but then it's another 6 or 7 months before they actually release it across all these different platforms.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, so that's why it ends up being a 2 year journey. So I'm really happy that it's we made it. It's out there, and yeah, just I hope it gets the eyeballs that we want it to get, and I hope it
Yeah.
has the impact that we want it to have. And we'll see. But yeah, it's good that it's out.
Yeah. So to everybody listening, you know what you're watching after this interview, right? That's what that's what's up. So my
Exactly.
my thought with all this is like, yeah, I train for long distance triathlon races and running races, and there's a lot of people in those communities, who maybe do one marathon or one Ironman, then they're like, I'll never do this again. And it seems this was your first documentary. You seem to want to do it again, but I can imagine after 2 years of this level of like the work you have to put into the pre-production, the actual filming it, post-production, distribution, all this kind of stuff, you could very easily say, you know what, that was great. I got my documentary out there. I get to have, my contribution to the world of Bitcoin documentaries. I'm going to move on to something else. So from what you told me, you are actually looking into potentially making another one. And so I was curious as to what was on your mind, what regions you were looking at, what angle you were looking to take, and yeah.
Yeah, so I I think I think I'll make another one,
Okay.
maybe more, and
Okay.
there's nothing definitive yet. I'm definitely thinking about it. I'm definitely eyeing up some potential. Some ideas are starting to brew and looking at some areas, and I think for me, I guess what I don't want to do is be one of those filmmakers, I don't know if this is common, but I know that it definitely happens where you're it, you're basically looking for the next thing. You feel like you've got to make something, and so you're kind of looking around trying to find that thing, right?
Yep.
In some ways, I am doing that, but I'm not doing it in any kind of. I'm gonna look at things. I'm gonna eye things up. I'm gonna talk to people and so on. But I'm not. I don't want to just make. I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't want to just make a documentary for the sake of making a documentary.
Fair.
I
Yeah.
want to. I want to do something. This for me, this film that we just did, Dare to Dream. I wanted it to be really special. I wanted
Yeah.
it the cinematography, the production, everything to be like really top level. I wanted I the story kind of fell in my lap. Well, I went to El Salvador, I went to elzonte, and I discovered it. But it was an extraordinary story with extraordinary characters,
Yeah.
and so I wanted it to be special and stand out. And if I do something again, I would like that to be the same.
Cool.
So, but I am on the one hand, it's tempting to do something a follow up in El Salvador because
Mm.
I've now developed a really strong connection with El Salvador and the people there, and I love
Yeah.
it. And it's just such fun. We met in El Salvador
Yeah.
just after the adopting Bitcoin conference, and I got to that's it's a special thing when you go there and you connect with people there and you feel that energy. I haven't had the chance yet to experience what's happening in Africa. You have to some degree, and we got a little bit of that in the film because we had Ray Youssef,
Ray Youssef, yeah.
who he used to be the CEO of Paxful, and all his experience with Nigeria. He had come to adopting Bitcoin in 2021, so we were able to do an interview with him there and get a sense of that vibrant Bitcoin energy that's happening in Africa, specifically with his story in Nigeria, and so that to me is also very exciting. So yeah, on the one hand, El Salvador it has got a lot going for it, and I'm sure there's more stories to come out of El Salvador. On the other hand, I'm also I'm looking at what's going on in Africa, and I'm seeing some of the stories there, some of the in different countries, and as we sort of spoke about a little bit when we were there. I think there's some potential for some a great documentary or more than one to come out of that region. So yeah, that's I'm eyeing it up. I'm going to speak to some other people, as you know, and I'll probably go on a trip there in the coming months. Not sure when, and then if I find that nugget or a couple of nuggets, because one thing I might not do, which is what I did with the last one, was just one big feature documentary, an hour and a half long. Maybe if I go to Africa, maybe 2 or 3, 4 short films out of there. We'll see. We'll see how. I don't, and maybe I never make another one. I don't know, but
Okay.
I think I will. But so that's kind of where I'm at right now. If any of because I know that you've done some interviews. I was watching one today, a great one from I can't remember his name, the chap from Uganda, one of your
Brendan
most
Mwine, he's
recent
amazing.
ones.
Yeah, he's amazing.
Yeah, really,
amazing.
Yeah, really fascinating interview, and I really encourage people to, because I think there's a temptation within Bitcoin to kind of migrate towards the big names,
Yes.
and people, but they tend to say they as interesting as they are, these people, they tend to say the same kind of things
over and over.
Yeah,
and it's not a slight towards them at all. I love Jeff Booth. No. I love Caitlin Long. I love Lynn Alden. I love all these people. But the reason that I started this was more like I'm fascinated by what I'm hearing coming out of these places, and I did it just to be like, we need more voices. We really need more voices coming out of Africa, coming out of Latin America. There's so much interesting stuff going on the ground, and there's some people covering it. Like Adopting Bitcoin has a good podcast, but their podcast is a little bit more like it's like informative. It's like almost, here's how we're building what we're building. Whereas I kind of want to celebrate the people on this podcast. I want to celebrate the people that have chosen to say, look, I'm going to be a community leader when it comes to Bitcoin. I'm going to take on that role. And I want to discuss how scary that is. And I want to celebrate what they've done and do that kind of stuff. Because the way I look at it, if this all continues to work, I think history is going to look back at these people, early circular economies, the people, Roman and Jorge and the people and Bitcoin Akasi, Herman Vivier and Luthando Nabambi and Brendan Mwine in Uganda. And they're going to say like, man, the history books are going to be written about these people. They did something. They brought people's attention to Bitcoin. They differentiated Bitcoin between Bitcoin and crypto. They encouraged a sort of long-term time or what is it called? Long-term time preference, whatever it is, low time preference. I'm sorry.
Low time preference.
Not encouraging get rich schemes, and I think that there's a really special thing happening. I'm actually going to be attending a graduation ceremony for Bitcoin Dada, which is a Kenyan woman named Marcelle Lorraine. She teaches women in Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda. basics of Bitcoin, everything from the philosophy behind it to the basic mechanics of it to how to custody it and use it. And I did a guest lecture there for these women. These women were so sharp, and they invited me to come to their graduation ceremony. And there's these beautiful community. There's this real community happening with this stuff. And I just feel like I come from the weird background. I have part of my MBA. I have part of an MSW, a master's in social work. I have part of a master's in psychology. I have a master's in education, and so I have all this background. And then I was in the music business for years. So like but what I sort of see here is like I see the social dimension of it. I see the financial dimension of it. I see the cultural dimension of it. And it's so rich in Africa, in Latin America, and Southeast Asia. That it's like, you know what, let's leave the What Bitcoin Did, interviews and Robert Breedlove, like they can continue to have their 15-30 guests that are predominantly on those shows, plus some new ones here and there. But I don't know. I want to look elsewhere. I'm just really excited. And if the whole idea of this is really, if the bigger idea here is banking the unbanked, let's just ask people in locations where people are unbanked what's going on. Let's not theorize about, like, let's not sit here and say like, yeah, it's going to do this. Well, we don't know that. Is it doing that? What are the hurdles? Can we help? And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways I have from El Salvador. I'm not sure if you felt it. You actually brought it up in the beginning. Bitcoin, people don't just automatically get orange pilled. There's a lot of skepticism around Bitcoin in El Salvador still, even with all of these eyes on it. There are people in elzonte that still don't accept Bitcoin, that are like, exactly. I don't buy it. And I came home and wrote a newsletter saying like, it's not exactly what some people purport it to be, but for the people who have chosen to get involved, it has been a very cool thing. And I think even just I was speaking with the gentleman that runs Chirito Coffee. I'm not sure if you ran into him at all, but
yeah, of course, yeah.
Amazing human being who just seems to just absolutely love having the Bitcoin community supporting his product, buying his coffee. He sold me a bag of coffee. He said, look, here's the QR code. If you want more, you can pay for it in Bitcoin. I'll have it shipped to your apartment in New York. And I'm like, if you have that entrepreneurial spirit, if you can look at this network, the actual Bitcoin network, but then the social dimension of the network, and look at it as a resource, it's huge. But it will take some time for people to trust all of that. It's a lot of expats in the country now. Maybe some of them don't have the best intentions. I don't know. I think most of them do. And it's, but the other side of it is like there's a tremendous amount of education that's still necessary. There's a lot of psychology, emotional sort of things that have to happen for greater adoption to occur. And I think in the grand scheme of things, it's probably best that it happens slowly and steadily versus all at once. And, people are overwhelmed and freak out and the volatility gets to them and blah, blah, blah. But I think what I admire about your take looking at the next documentary is, I think in the world of producing any sort of, I don't mean to reduce it to this word because I don't love the word, but you produced content, right? You're producing a film. I'd rather call it a film, exactly. But there's this world of like, just get as much content out there as possible. And that can be almost a bit exploitative if you're not from these cultures and you're sort of there saying like, oh, I'm going to film it and we're going to make this thing. You have to earn the trust of people, and people have to want to have you there. They want to have to tell you their story. I think it's beautiful that you're willing to donate, 90% of the profits you make back to the community. And I think that all of this is going to be a big part of making content in these places, making journalism content, whatever you want to call it. But I think it's going to be a matter of some level of trust, not just going to places and trying to like exploit the situation for your own gain as a filmmaker or something like, or to be popular in the Bitcoin community. There has to be a certain level of trust. And I think that's why I was so moved at adopting Bitcoin with the people, Valentin at Motive Peru, why I'm friends with Herman from Bitcoin Akasi, and other people who have really earned the trust of the people that they're working with and really care about the people they're working with. I think that's a part of it. So I wish you the best of luck with wherever you choose to sort of set your sights and work. Having met you, I know you have the personality to earn the trust of these, different peoples that you'd be working with. And yeah, to bring it back to the documentary, I think you not only earn their trust, but you really in a very artistic way, really represented them beautifully. I think, you really
Thank you.
celebrated their stories. Yeah, my pleasure. Absolutely. And I don't mean to ramble about it, but I get passionate about this stuff, coming from this world of working in these communities before Bitcoin.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a lot of noise. Bitcoin fixes this, Bitcoin fixes that. Bitcoin maybe fixes it with the help of human beings helping other people and teaching other people and being empathic towards other people. It doesn't magically fix everything. And I know that some people might have an issue with my saying that. It's just that it takes a lot of work for people to understand it. And I think if people, especially if you're in a developed country and you have all of the educational resources, good internet connection, all of the resources at your fingertips, this still takes 2 or 3 years to really wrap your head around. Bitcoin takes a long time all the rabbit holes you have to go down, the technological rabbit hole, the Austrian economics, what is modern monetary theory, what is fiat, all this kind of stuff. It takes a long, long, long time to fully grasp. So imagine you didn't have all the resources and you're not used to having a bank account and you're not used to, this stuff is going to take a long time for even for their nervous systems to adjust to. So I think I came back from El Salvador with more of a realistic take on what's happening than I've ever had. I feel more now like, if you want to be a part of this space, get ready to do some work and get your hands
Yeah.
dirty in a good way. Like get ready to be uncomfortable. If you're going to go to a country and talk about Bitcoin, speak some of the language, get into situations where you're not just hanging out with expats, and really try to do the best you can to be with the people, to be present to the people with whom you're speaking with, or the people that you might want to help adopt it. Sorry
Yeah.
about the, yeah.
No, it's good. I mean, it's exactly, you're spot on. And I think, just to build on that, as I say, I think it's great that you're doing these podcasts with these other characters, these people that are not typically heard on the other normal, kind of Bitcoin podcast. Because
Yeah,
as I say, I was listening to that one today, and it was fascinating, and it was just really great to hear these stories, these insights, just completely fresh perspective, and one of my things, my frustration maybe is a little strong, but is that the Bitcoiners, I think, are a little bit too much in an echo chamber, right? I
yes,
think we
yes.
are a bit too. We do tend to spend a little bit too much time kind of talking with each other, at each other, and doing podcasts for each other, for each other's benefit, and you kind of, I've been in this space a long time now, and I've heard, and it starts to, you start, well, why aren't we better at communicating outside of our echo chamber? Why aren't we better at
Yeah,
getting outside? And I think, you're doing that by bringing in these new voices. And I would, really
appreciate it.
encourage other people to try and, break out. And I guess that comes back again to the documentary thing. For me, it's like, there's a lot of video, to your point, there's a lot of content being created
Yeah,
in Bitcoin, but I don't think there's always, people are questioning why they are making that content. I think
totally.
some of it, and I don't want to, because I know there's some really great content happening, and I don't want to, but I think sometimes it's being done very much like with just Bitcoiners in mind, right? It's
Yes.
about being right. I'm going to make this for the Bitcoin community, and they're going to love it, or
Yeah.
whatever. Well, is there any real point in doing that?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think if it's entertainment, just like, yeah, we want to be entertained, so that's great. You got a ready-made audience to entertain, and that's cool. But I think when it comes to actually trying to spread the Bitcoin message, if you like, into
Yeah.
the wider field, into the wider world, we need to be a bit more thoughtful about how we do that, and a bit more creative about how we do that. And so that's, yeah, for me, that's, that I'm actually in the middle of writing an article called the secret to orange pilling the world.
Mm-mm.
And the idea behind that is really about taking, because along with Bitcoin, the asset itself are all the principles that go with it. I often talk about Bitcoin being a movement, right? More than a community, right? I think
Yeah.
of it as a bottom up, the first truly global bottom up movement that is kind of trying to change the world, and that's a
Yep.
very powerful idea, right? That
Yep.
you've got this movement, bottom up movement across the globe. So yeah, I so sorry. Yeah, with this movement, there are all these different kind of attributes, principles that go with it, and just a few of them are things like truth and freedom, and I would say peace, but also this kind of low time preference, and
Yep.
so there's a lot of other stuff going on in the world that where there is overlap, right? Where people may be trying to do something, trying to change something for the
Yep.
better, for the
Yep.
long term, right? But they don't have Bitcoin in their lives. So, just a couple of examples. Um, there are some people who are passionate about regenerative farming, right?
Yep.
Trying to change the way our food is produced.
Yep.
The food has, it's, I know there's actually a book now called Fiat Food, I think, or
Yeah.
something like
Yeah.
that. I
Yeah.
think but yeah, our food has been, is being corrupted by the fiat standard, in the way it's produced, and
Yep.
it's that kind of very instant short-term thinking, and the soil's been destroyed, and we're
Yep.
using just ridiculous amounts of chemicals and fertilizers to make up for the lack of nutrients in the soil and stuff. So there are people who are passionate about kind of thinking long term about how do we create better food in this
Yep.
world. Well, to me, that idea, it fits perfectly with a lot of the kind of Bitcoin thinking, which is
Yep.
about low time preference, and more self-sustaining, self-responsibility,
Yep.
and so, you know, are there ways that we can intersect, the kind of Bitcoin with those people? And I think that's how we're going to wake up more people,
Yeah.
is taking some of the same principles and starting to kind of apply them, or combine them, with other areas. I mean, that was just one example. There's so
Yeah.
many other areas. So anyway, that's something that I'd love to see a bit more of us get out of our echo chambers. And Dare to Dream was very much with that in mind, right? Of
Yeah.
trying to reach a whole different audience, and connect with them on a human level. So yeah, so just my little rant or ramble to build on what you were saying.
No, it's
Yeah.
perfectly put, and I think what I actually really like about the title of your film, and I guess you would call it the subtitle, "Dare to Dream: A Story from El Salvador." Bitcoin's not mentioned in it, and I think that I actually purposely called this podcast "New Renaissance Capital," whatever the subtitle is, "Bitcoin and Human Flourishing." But the title being just "New Renaissance Capital," I wanted it to sort of be like, oh, what does that mean? And I think similar, like, oh, what's the story from El Salvador? And then you're sort of introduced to Bitcoin and the role that it plays. But I think that that's actually important, because there's a lot of with Bitcoin, there's a lot of like, lead with Bitcoin and jam it down people's throats sort of thing. And it's like,
Yeah.
maybe we could ease them into it. Like, maybe we could.
Exactly. Exactly.
I think that's a great approach. And that's where the NGO world sort of fascinated me. It's just like this sort of the, uh, you know, people that I mean, the NGO world tech tends to be people who kind of, are looking for where the systems are not working, and they're serving people, they're doing it their own way. It's a non-governmental organization. These people very specifically did not become like public school educators or something like that within the system. They're doing something that's sort of separate from it. So I saw the overlap there. But then I think also it's like, you also don't want to someone was talking to, I can't think of her last name right now. It's Valerie. She was one of the hosts for the first day on the main stage at Adopting Bitcoin. And,
Yeah.
someone said to her, you want to do, she's talking about healing and some of the other sort of subcultures or things that she's into. And someone said, well, why don't you sort of focus on that and then sort of, eventually get to Bitcoin. And I think that it's sort of an art. You don't want to put Bitcoin too far into the background, because if that's the thing you're passionate about, it sort of has to be like upfront enough. But you also do want to sort of be inviting at the same time. So I think it's more of an art than a science when it comes to like luring other subcultures in. But I think that there's a lot of magic in that. I've had a bunch of people say to me, I had no idea what Bitcoin was before I started listening to this podcast. Friends, family members, all that kind of stuff, and now learning it, through the story of human beings. And then I think, to go back to an earlier point, I worked with all these bigger aid agencies and stuff, and you know, like trying to get the paternalistic perspective out of people's minds, that people in Africa need help, people in Latin America need help. It's like, maybe, yeah, to some degree, but it doesn't mean they're helpless. It doesn't mean that. And that's the messaging that at least what I got in New York. We have late night infomercials of African children with flies in their eyes and this and that, and that's the way you're taught to think. And for me, having lived in these places and having seen it differently, my thoughts are like, well, that wasn't my experience. My experience was I met a lot of very, very intelligent people, sharp people over there that unfortunately have systems working against them. Here's one system, Bitcoin, that might actually be something that works for them. And at that point, someone like Brendan Mwine, it's a mind-boggling story. He was an orphan in Uganda. He now raises money in Bitcoin for 77 orphans in Uganda, houses them, clothes them, feeds them with in part from this Bitcoin donations. And it's like, you're not going to hear that story in the mainstream media. You're just not going to hear it. It's never going to happen. It just goes against the whole narrative of paternalism and, blah, blah, blah. So,
Exactly.
yeah. So,
Exactly.
yeah, let me leave it there. I know it's not even like I have a feeling. I know we're going to end up doing this again at some point. Maybe it's after your follow-up documentary in El Salvador, or your documentary from somewhere in Africa, or maybe just whenever. But I just wanted to say thank you very much for taking the time to do this. I hope everybody listening or watching this, sees Graham here, a very kind, gentle, compassionate human being, not a maniac. I wasn't at a conference with like complete psychopaths. These are the type of people that I met in El Salvador. People like Graham, very creative people, compassionate people doing really, really amazing work. So I do hope you enjoyed what he has to say, and please go and watch the documentary. And on that note, please let people know, again, maybe just repeat some of the platforms that it's on, and then let people know where they can find you, if you don't mind.
Well, I appreciate the kind words, Frank. Thank you
Pleasure.
for that, and thank you so much for having me on. So I think the easiest thing, well, as I say, it's on on many platforms depending on where you are in the world. So certainly in the US and in the US and Canada, it's on. Well, I'll start with the US. It's on almost sort of everything. It's on Amazon, Apple, YouTube Movies, Google Play, Xbox. It's on all the cable TV networks, on satellite TV. It is, as I say, it's to rent or buy at this point in time because of through the distributor that we went. It's not a profit making venture. So, you know, please, don't be put off by that, and try and find a few bucks in your budget to spend on it, or a few sats, and and then, as I say, outside of outside of the US, depending on where you are, there are other platforms that it's on. The easiest thing to say, for kind of everybody's sake, is to go to the website for the film, and there you can get all the information. So the website is daretodream-film.com, and if you go to the news section, we have kind of listed out where what platforms it's on in different regions. and also on the website, if you're outside of the exclusive rights territories, which is US, Canada, and Caribbean, you can also buy it with Bitcoin through the film, download it. So that's the place to go. And other than that, then I would also just direct people to my Twitter or X handle, which is at Bitcoin_films with an S on the end.
Yep.
And it's called Dare to Dream, but I basically run that profile. And yeah, follow me there because one, I will give updates about the film if it's going to be on different platforms, because it is coming out on different platforms, also different language. So we're going to do it. We have a Spanish version coming out across the whole of Latin America on Apple. So that should
Very
be coming
cool.
very soon. And and then also, just as I started to think about new documentaries, if people are interested in that, then that's where you'll find information. So that's it. Thank you so much again, Frank, and I look forward to chatting again whenever
Yeah.
whenever the time is right.
Yeah, yeah, and thank you to Scott Wolf for introducing Graham and I. If you're listening,
Indeed.
Scott, much appreciated. And we will
Exactly.
leave it there for today, everybody. Thank you all for listening, and we will talk soon. Take it easy.